Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this session of the Device Authority Virtual Summit. It's a distinct pleasure for me to have a good friend, David Ihrie, here with us today. Good morning, David.
Yeah,
how are you?
Yeah, glad to be
or,
here.
or good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's morning here still. To kick things off, it'd be great if you might tell us a little bit about yourself and what your role is at VIPC and what VIPC does.
Sure. So VIPC, the Virginia Innovation Partnership Corporation, is an extension of the state government in Virginia. So our focus is technology-based economic development. And we do that primarily by working with small, innovative companies, right? So my role there is, in addition to just being the Chief Technology Officer, I lead the Strategic Initiatives Division. And so that's what are the technologies that are emerging that will be important, let's say, in 3 to 5 years from an industry point of view. And how do we get there? How do we help advance those technologies with the secret hidden agenda, of course, of bringing more jobs to Virginia?
There you go. Economic development is right. Being an economist at heart, I completely agree with that approach. So today we're going to be talking about some current challenges in securing critical infrastructure and how public-private partnerships can help make that happen. So I think it's an important topic to think in terms of.
Absolutely.
We often see that the big players always lead in innovation cycles, but we're getting into a technology space where the emerging technologies are really available to everyone.
Right.
And so this notion of local smart communities, smart infrastructure at the local and regional level is starting to become more and more of an issue. And so I don't think we can go back to the big players all the time. If the big players could have done it, they would have done it already, is kind of my view. So talk a little bit about the importance of working locally and why the smart community approach is a good one, thinking forward and sort of forward-proofing our ability to be able to future-proofing our ability to implement these technologies where it really matters at the local level for communities in Virginia, but also elsewhere.
Well, sure. And so, a couple different threads there. I think because we come from a state government perspective, we want to make sure that the technologies that we're working with are accessible to everybody.
Right.
So small communities, not only big cities. That's why I call it smart communities.
Yeah.
And so there's a question of scale and economics there. The other kind of thread that we're looking at are I'll call them, public safety emergency management is kind of an underserved use case, right?
Right.
So those budgets, if you look at the budgets, if you, in the U.S., there's something like 80,000 different organizations, public safety emergency management organizations, and so they're
I never realized that number was that big.
It's enormous, and so the capacity of an individual entity to lead the way, to take the risk, to try new technologies is very, very difficult. And so, and kind of the third thread there, I think when we talk about things like cybersecurity, it's a very specialized set of expertise, right?
Right.
We all know that CISOs are a rare breed, right? And
a couple of years ago we had 6 million job openings for CISOs, and it's probably grown.
And so how can we provide capabilities that really make the enormous potential benefits of things like IoT or advanced air mobility accessible to places, to people, to communities that don't have that capacity on their own.
Just as a question, since you are an economic development based organization in mission, how do you see the adoption of technology not only from the understanding of capability, but also the human ability to manage that environment, and maybe where AI kind of fits in that mix? Is there a part of what you do in the Smart Community Testbed to sort of bring that comprehensive view? Because it's kind of challenging to bring all these technologies in and not have people understanding what they do and how they work, and building management around that.
Sure. So there's, I think there's the capacity to work with and manage a diverse set of technologies from a local government point of view. The other critically important thing that we've seen is public acceptance. And so if you look at, I'll use facial recognition in cities, right? I mean, there have been a number of examples of cities that have put in place facial recognition or people tracking kinds of technologies, and the public pushback against that has been so strong that they've had to take those capabilities down, right? And
until there's a problem, and then
but I mean, I think there's a continuous tension there on public acceptance, and so an important part of what we try to do is be open to the public, provide educational opportunities, outreach opportunities. I think, for example, in Virginia, some of the companies that are now undertaking drone operations did a really nice job of reaching out to local communities and saying, this is what we're doing, here's the benefits it's going to provide to you. When you see these things flying, above the tree line, this is what's going on.
That's actually really important to get people calm down about, who's looking at me and why.
Because I think fear, and you talk about artificial intelligence, right? We're seeing the same thing right now. I mean, people tend to react negatively or to fear things where they don't understand it, and so that's critically important. But back on the capacity side, on the management, and so we're sitting here, for example, in Stafford County, right? It's a local community, talented group of people, but they're not necessarily technology experts across these range of technologies. And so actually just in the other room right now, we have sort of the director of public works, some of the, and so engaging with those leaders
within the community,
providing the professional development opportunities, letting them try things out in a low risk way, and that's one of the things that the Testbed brings.
That really is kind of critically important for them to feel comfortable that they can test something out, learn about it, and get past that anxiety over what's the consequence. And as a public servant, you kind of worry about, you don't want to expose your community to any kind of risk that you can control.
I mean, either technology or the financial risk, right? I mean, if you decide that, let's say a large company product is really what you need, and you invest a whole bunch of money in it, and for whatever reason it doesn't work out, right? I mean, that's a lot of tax dollars
right.
Or, similarly, if you invest in a risky technology and it doesn't quite work out, right?
How do you mitigate and manage that in an effective way? The topic for this conversation is about, is it really possible for us to hit zero trust as a target?
Yep.
Is it an attainable thing, given that it's an evolving problem?
Sure.
It's not a static issue. I think the Testbed provides an interesting opportunity for us to validate, particularly around security issues. Those technologies that might be a little risky. Try them out. Well, let's see what the exposure is. Let's get some people to pen test and really do this continuous understanding of develop an understanding of the risks that are involved. Because if you can't measure that risk, you can't actually figure out how to allocate resources to do it. Right. Before we get into what you guys are doing specifically, how do you go about understanding and helping people understand, particularly city managers and those in responsible positions at the community level, how to quantify the risks sufficiently that they're willing to commit themselves to figuring out how to get to zero trust and maybe working with you more effectively? How is that conversation going within the community?
Well, so quantifying it, I think, is difficult, but qualitatively, I remember 10 years ago we stood up a cybersecurity focused business accelerator, right, Mach 37. And at the time, the discussion was, the script kiddies living in their mother's basement, just playing around.
Right.
And it took a couple of years before we realized, well, no, the big threat is nation state actors.
Exactly, right.
And I think, now there's a generational change going on with cybersecurity, and it doesn't take too many examples in the real world of large scale systems being hacked, right? I mean, I think people's awareness is now.
I think even just the more recent news about the hacks are really giving people some pause.
Or certainly the news coming out of Europe, right? I mean, the Russian attempts to break into governmental websites or things
Exactly.
like that, right? I mean, so I think the awareness is now there, and people are starting to think about, okay, what can we do? So far, they've been kind of after the fact piecemeal solutions, or buy this product or do that thing, or right. And I think we've ended up, hopefully as a result of good planning, but partly a happenstance to be able to really think holistically about how that's working. And the theme of, I think, this series with Device Authority is supply chain security, right? And what I'm worrying about now is the security of the data supply chain. Because when we talk about smart computers, we talk about IoT devices, we talk about critical infrastructure. It's really about the data, and how can we get the data we need, share it with the people who need it, and do that in a secure way.
Everything's part of the supply chain now, suddenly. Including the chips inside of your refrigerator at home. Everything adds up. So,
we're putting flood sensors out there, wildfire sensors, and certainly Washington was
definitely
beneficiary of Canadian wildfire. And so, all of those things, I think we're shifting from an environment that's IT centric, right? I mean, the old corporate protect my network at the edges, right?
The server
to now it's IoT, right? I mean, the number of devices, the number of computers talking to other computers instead of people, right? I mean, it's just exploding and is dwarfing kind of the classic challenges.
So, in your view, we've gotten to the point where the public is more aware.
Yeah.
We also have federal government, and I think increasingly state and local government, appreciating the risks and the challenges, to the point where we now have CISA, we now have DHS worrying about it, we have NIST providing guidance, and other agencies really starting to pay attention to it. I was at a conference recently, and one of the directors from CISA was presenting the list of all critical, identified areas of critical infrastructure, and it's pretty much everybody. I'm going, what are we excluding? It's kind of sideways. So from a guidance perspective, it looks like the public sector is pretty involved and has made some great strides.
Right.
In terms of adoption and deployment, in terms of actually delivering on those expectations that now the public is having, and at various levels the public sector is sort of responding to, what do you see as some of the challenges in really implementing and reaching that point where we can say we can feel a little more comfortable, the public can calm down a little bit because we think we have things under control? What do you see as some obstacles there?
Well, I mean, one obstacle is what I just mentioned, right? I think many of the security professionals who are out in various companies and so forth are still coming from this, information technology mindset. Where it's laptops on a corporate network kind of thing. And the world is different now, right? I mean, so it's I care less about, the individual devices that are on my network. It's going to be open. It's going to, right? What I care more about is the data and how to protect the data. So that's one thing. I think that shifted mindset from the professional community is going to be critical. You talk about the guidance from the federal side, from CISA and from NIST and so forth. There's a huge gap between this kind of not yet completely defined end state goal that those authorities would like us all collectively to get to, and what's practically and economically feasible for the critical infrastructure owners, many of whom are private entities or quasi-public entities,
Right.
to implement, right? And I'll give you an example. So we're looking to develop the advanced air mobility industry in Virginia. How can we bring drones and air taxis and things into the mix of services that are out there? That industry is going to be built around the smaller regional airports. So those over time, those are very likely to become the feeder air routes to the larger hubs like Dulles Airport or large airports are. And so what does that mean in terms of the security challenges for suddenly these airports that are part of the passenger transport system?
We're introducing new players in the supply chain effectively. Right.
The trade-off there is that if I come in and say, here's the 100-page standard that you need to comply with, those airports, that's not economically feasible. Those airports
they just can't do it.
Out of business.
Right.
And so how can we, and I think we, right, as security professionals are in a position to interpret what that guidance is coming from CISA, coming from NIST, coming from others, distill it into some reference implementations, let's say, so I can, out here in my test bed, I can say, look, here's a set of IoT devices, here's the security architecture we have now put in place. You can come see and touch it and play with it and do penetration testing against it. And here's at a price point that you as a regional airport or you as a critical infrastructure owner can actually afford to do, as well as an economic model that makes it feasible. Right?
That I think is critical path. Is people at the regional airport aren't really going to understand where the challenge is and how it's going to play out.
I mean, they understand their challenge.
They understand,
but not what to do about it.
Right. So good segue. You talk a little bit about what you're doing specifically, and
Sure.
maybe give some examples from we got a couple 3 slides here that provide some background. So please.
Yeah, thank you. So I've referred a couple times to the test bed. We actually so kind of 2 things I think make it unique. So as opposed to, for example, a research laboratory or a corporate development laboratory, as you mentioned, we're a public-private partnership, so we're kind of not trying to sell a product, we're trying to prove capabilities. And the second thing is although there's leading-edge technology there, it is really a solution center. It's really is a particular capability ready to be put into practice in the real world. So it's kind of early market opportunity as opposed to even late stage research.
Yeah.
One of the ways we've done that is in the chart that you can see there is it's not just a single place. We have a whole network of what we're calling these living laboratories spread out across Virginia and actually into DC and North Carolina. Each one is an operational facility, so it's actually has a day job.
So you're talking to the people who actually are doing work and who will have the concern and have to get comfortable with the idea that they have to solve the problem themselves.
Absolutely.
And giving them the resources that they can actually get to some kind of solution and say, yes, we've made some progress.
Yeah.
And which in of itself is motivational, because if you feel like you've made some progress, then you think you can make more progress.
Yeah. Right. And I think there's a great degree of risk tolerance too. So the people that we work with are, understand the risk involved in new technologies, have capacity to take on some of that risk. We try to offset some of that risk organizationally, and so you can see a good set of things, and each one is kind of focused on a slightly different area. So we have some work in port security around Norfolk. We've done a lot of our drone operations in Winchester at the airport there. Here at the Stafford Smart Community Testbed, it's really focused around IoT security. In Washington, D.C. at Capital One Arena, we've really put in significant capacity around indoor capabilities. So that kind of network of living labs is what we try to take advantage of.
That's wonderful. Here's some other.
This is a snapshot actually of some of the capabilities in the Capital One.
That's
Arena.
the Capital One Arena.
As full up digital twin, airflow modeling, Actually, one of the, we talked a little bit about the economic model. So one of the things that we've done there is integrated with the building management system. And because we're able to do analytics based on the sensors that we've installed for more efficient operation of the building, they've actually saved way more money in operational costs than the cost of the installation.
So they saw additional value add.
So they're saving money every day on the basis of,
which brings up an interesting economic kind of an argument. For the most part, in introductory classes in economics, I would make the point that, look, national defense and security are cost centers. They don't have value. Right. They're not productive assets. So we don't think of them generally that way. And they're a drain on GDP.
Right.
In this case, as we get into securing these environments, it seems that, and I think the example you just gave from Capital One Arena is that by securing those environments, those in strategic level positions who are evaluating cost benefit and where they should invest their time and value, realize that, look, by protecting these assets and by creating secure pathways, as we would think of it now, roots of trust for both data and function for devices, whether it's a sensor or an actuator, we can derive new value. So I think it's important to point out that, the Capital One Arena folks realize that, hey, wait a minute, we're actually saving some money here in real terms. It's got real value add to the bottom line.
So my phrase for that is I like technology that earns its living doing its day job.
They're perfectly said. Yes,
and
exactly.
In this case, the public safety benefits, and there are significant public safety benefits, come along for free.
And I think that's
right.
That's the beauty of it. So here's another set of sensors.
We're working with a whole variety of different sensors. Some of these are environmental sensors. Some of them are we're looking at airspace awareness, so we can understand. So there's some weather sensors there. There's can't see it very well in the picture there, but in the lower right is actually a little robot lawnmower.
Oh wow!
So we're
is that what keeps the grass clean?
Well, not yet. Right? The parks guys have to be comfortable with a robot with sharp blades running around in the parks. Right. So
small animals, small people.
But so first tentative steps into autonomous robots operating in a community environment.
That's wonderful. Let's see what else you got here in terms of examples.
So this is
that airspace,
right? And so we've I think led the way. Virginia's leading the way. Actually, I just got back from Asia. Actually, in across the world, I think what we're doing in Virginia is kind of leading the way in terms of advanced air mobility. Is kind of the industry. I'd mentioned that previously. What the state can provide and what we're working towards is airspace awareness. So the public data infrastructure that provides any drone operators out there, the airports, whoever the interested parties are, law enforcement as well, with a single public picture of what's flying in the drone space. Below 1,000 feet, obviously. The FAA kind of covers above that. We've done that. There's an application called the Virginia Flight Information Exchange, VA-FIX, and so the screenshots there are from that.
Very nice.
It's hard to tell from that picture, but and now close to almost 10 other states now are in the process of actively adopting their versions of this. So
that's actually really interesting. I want to say about 5-6 years ago, I was in a conversation, actually in Seattle, with some folks talking about security and the role of IoT devices in that context. And one of the CTOs, Chief Technology Officers from one of the major sports stadiums on the West Coast, I won't get into the particulars, said, look, when drones first came out, the owners got together, these baseball, MLB folks, got together and said, wow, we can use these drones to really enhance the experience, collect, lots of images and data. And somebody on the security side brought in a drone, a video of a drone with a machine gun on it, and shooting things up, and they basically all agreed they were never going to touch drones in the stadium. So you have this issue of securing that airspace environment.
Right.
That's not just about airports. It's this CTO said, look, I've got access to my facility, to the stadium, from air, land, and sea, because I'm sitting right next to the water. And so having the ability to manage that space and secure physical security using these technologies is going to be kind of important. So right. I think this is going to be something that we're going to have drones flying everywhere, doing the kinds of control surveillance that we need in order to ensure security all the way around.
Yeah, and there's legislation now in Congress that says, okay, can we bring drones as an integral part to the airspace, right? I mean, try to push that. Again, I mentioned the air taxi kind of thing, and so this is an enabler for that. But I mean, to your point, it's a double-edged sword, right? And I mean, certainly we see that in the news every day from Ukraine, right?
Right.
And so I think part of that is just understanding what's flying out there. And the picture in the lower left there, we currently are working with the state police. They're taking a sensor around, kind of characterizing the airspace, just seeing what's flying, because nobody's really done that before. And without going into the details, I will tell you that kind of everybody was surprised at how many drones are flying out there, and how many of them are not operating within FAA approved flight envelopes. And
well, it brings up an interesting kind of dimension of the problem of getting to zero trust and securing the environment. Is that you really do have to have a public-private partnership, because the new mechanisms to collect data and observe what's going on around us, and then with intelligent machines and autonomous AI-driven vehicles and all that, we're discovering new perspective, and you have to have some channel to have a conversation back on the legislative side, on the requirements and expectation side.
Right.
I didn't know we could see that. Oh my God. We need to protect here. So as you're seeing that play out, bringing the adoption and implementation from a cost benefit perspective, from an allocation of resources perspective, with driving legislation and requirements gathering, how do you see us doing there? Are we doing a good job? Is there room for improvement?
So, and I'll talk to Virginia, because we've worked closely. There are state regulations that vary from state to state. Virginia has been a very permissive environment from a drone point of view. So, for example, one of the things the state law doesn't let local governments just eliminate the use of drones in their locality, right? I mean, so it's a fairly permissive environment. I think the kind of the regulatory hurdle is proving the safety case to the FAA, and so right now that just takes a lot of hours of flights, of data gathering, of making the case that you can operate safely beyond line of sight, over crowds, at nighttime, the various operating modes in weather.
Right.
And so that's what that kind of green stripe on that, and you can see it there in the lower right. That green stripe is looking at a first, what we're calling an enablement area. Can we provide sensors across that zone in an economically feasible way to collect the data, protect the data, and use that data to make the positive case, the safety case, and so forth.
I can fully appreciate the fact that doing that through a test experiment kind of way gives us a little bit of room to not have 100% assurance before we even know what we're assuring, kind of problem, right? It's there.
Well, and I think in that case, for example, we're using a layered sensor architecture. There's different types of sensors, and so there are questions about how densely do they need to be placed, what kind of coverage, what are you catching, what are you missing, right? There's actually in the previous slide, the
Go back to that for us. Yeah,
there on the right-hand side, kind of the green blotchy thing on the right, is actually a simulation analysis of the coverage of a sensor. So we're calibrating the models against the actual sensor performance that we're seeing in the field, so that we can then use those models as a basis to kind of scale the case. And so we're really methodically, again, trying to build that, but it's all based on data. Right?
So as I want to get into the data a little more, but before I go there, the notion that we have to have scalable mechanisms to manage these environments and secure them, capabilities. I think it's important, but I'd like to get your thoughts on, as we add more of these technologies into the environment, how important is it that the decision makers think in terms of bringing forward tools and technologies that are scalable from the get-go, because it's just going to be unwieldy otherwise. Any thoughts on that?
Well, so, I mean, scale is going to happen, right, in terms of the growth of devices, IoT devices that are out there. And I think, to me, one of the lessons learned from the good old internet is, scale without attention to security causes problems. Right? I think, to me, it's not so much will scale happen, but can you rationally deliver an approach that will scale economically and will scale securely, and so those are can we address those issues
and then align those with public policy.
Sure.
In a practical
and from an economic development point of view, that lets me bring in the 80% of the land mass of Virginia that's not concentrated in urban environments. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to.
Yeah. I always appreciated the fact that you called it a smart community, and not a smart city.
Yeah, for exactly
it's that shift. So talk a bit, if you don't mind, about this data exchange, this ability to share data, and how how you work through getting public policy and practical delivery and deployment through some public-private partnership, where you've got to bring in commercially available technologies, together with some experimental ones, together with regulators and policymakers in a useful way, and then maybe we'll segue into where that data all goes and what we do with it.
Sure.
But if you talk a little bit about putting something like this together.
Yeah. So let me switch to a different use case. I talked about the advanced air mobility. I think now, if you think about emergency management, right? So an event happens. We got kind of on this track. A couple of years ago, there were some tornadoes over Christmas, over the holidays in Kentucky. Right, or if you think about the East Palestine, the train derailment.
Right.
When an event like that happens, there are lots of people involved in the response, right? And so, like in the train derailment case, most of the immediately readily available kind of first responders were actually from Pennsylvania, right? They were in Western Pennsylvania.
Right.
And so, those kind of situations bring together a bunch of different organizational entities. They bring together in an ad hoc, real-time kind of way. And how do you provide the best possible picture of what's going on in an area, in the environment? How do you make sure that the people accessing that data are appropriate and are qualified to do the responses that they're doing? One other example, for me, a formative example was after 9/11 in New York. So I was, living in Princeton at the time, and some of the story was that there were private citizens or there were emergency management groups from New Jersey going across the bridge, picking up people who were injured and taking them who knows where.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And so in some cases, it took weeks to locate where those people were and kind of reunite them.
Yeah.
So how do you...
The best of intentions leads to confusion.
You bet. And so how, in that kind of environment, in real time, how you show up and you say, I'm from XYZ Fire Department and I'm here to help. How do I know that I can trust you, that I can share data with you appropriately, that maybe there's restricted data about the situation that you should have access to, but I don't want to be
Others to
publicly
know.
released,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And so that whole, how do I bring together any sensor, any kind of group of people, whatever the user application they're on, however they establish their credentials and make it work in real time. And so that's a huge challenge. And so hey, I like those huge challenges.
Well, yeah.
And interestingly, so now we talk about the data, right? The data infrastructure, the common data infrastructure, to me, looks the same, whether we're talking emergency management or advanced air mobility or so on.
It's all the same data.
Right? It's how do I move data from point A to point B securely and manage who gets access to it.
Right. So really we're talking about, when we think about zero trust and supply chain here, I think you're talking about the data supply chain effectively.
Right.
And in that sense, zero trust means you've got to trust the sources of the data. So it goes, we're getting to the point where it's not just the people you've got to trust.
Right.
You've got to trust all of those component pieces in the mix. How are things going on that score in terms of what the testbed's seen, what you've seen, and the kind of progress hopefully we're making so that we can create this ecosystem of trusted things and people so that we can get to sharing data in a meaningful way?
I'll tell you, and of course, you and I have had this conversation now for a couple of years. I think your characterization initially was, "Oh, so you want to boil the ocean?"
Exactly.
Actually, I'm more hopeful at this point than I thought I would be. I'm actually quite optimistic that we can put together a strong example of a system that does what we just spoke about this year.
Excellent.
And show it in operation. I'm almost.
It's kind of scary that it can actually be true, right? Right.
But if you look at this diagram, we've actually piloted every single piece of it. The data governance, the security at the edge, the various sensors, the various user applications, and in some cases, we're putting those together now into subsets of the larger architecture.
That's back in the day, I was a grad student, econometrics, and the dean made me the director for the Census Data Service.
Yeah.
Which was the same kind of problem, right? We've been trying to collect data that's useful for public policy purpose and security for a long time. So it's kind of a challenge, but this is fabulous. Now you get into the problem of, okay, how am I going to fuse all this data together and make it meaningful?
Right.
Which is kind of interesting.
I mean, how do I work across the handful of major cloud providers, right? None of which exactly interoperate.
So one of the questions that came up here in the Q&A here, we got this question of, one, in building that Commonwealth Data Trust, that framework, who are the decision makers and who are the enforcers? Because if you don't have consequence, people don't act, particularly in the public sector. So what's your sense? Who were those players, and how do you go about really managing to an environment that even now extends well beyond national borders, where it's international? And I know you do some work internationally. You mentioned Korea, your visit to Korea.
Right. So let's just stay sort of locally to begin with. Who are the decision makers and who are the enforcers, right? So I think ultimately the federal government is going to end up, NIST and CISA and so forth.
Right.
And we'll end up, and their market forces as well, right? And we'll end up being the enforcers. So if there's, you look at Colonial Pipeline or you look at the rail system, right? When significant events like that happen, the federal response is kind of brought in and enforced at that point.
Right.
Who are the decision makers? Are the local critical infrastructure members. So if I am an airport operator, or if I own a piece of critical infrastructure, I'll be making those, or if I'm a local government, right? I'll be making those decisions about what I want to spend money on, what the value proposition is to me. And so it's a very distributed,
Right.
disaggregated thing. And I think our role, we've kind of, both at the state level and as a test bed, is to show the possibility, right? And to make the economic case that goes with it. So I think we've done that.
Possibility and sense of attainability
Yeah.
of some level of success relative to dealing with these issues. That I
Right.
think is where you're.
You bet, right? And so I think, again, the Capital One arena, we've actually achieved that success. So we've shown that the owner-operator of that facility, the public, big crowds in there,
Right.
Is able to operate more efficiently, save money, and provide additional public safety. Security.
Which is nice, and they all came hand in hand. It all came together as a bundle.
Yeah.
So you think about getting to a zero trust architecture.
Yeah.
So circling back on our topic of the day for this session, what are the things? What are the steps in getting there, and how did you go about thinking through in building your public-private partnership? What you needed from the public side, what you needed from the corporate side, the industry side, and for policymakers. How did you put this all together in a way that gives people confidence that they can actually get there?
Well, I'd like to claim that I thought it through from the very start and put together a strategic plan, but that's not it at all. I think
best laid plans.
Yeah. I think the reality is we started with the issues, emergency management, right? How do I provide value to that community, which traditionally has been resource strapped, has been slow to adopt new technologies. We stood up a public safety innovation center to help as a transition point for some of those things. But if you just start pulling the thread on that use case that I just described, a bunch of people showing up to respond, one by one, you start uncovering, well, what do you need? Well, I need good understanding of what's going on in the environment. I need sensors, right? And where are those sensors going to send their data? To the cloud, and somebody's going to access them. And what are the challenges with that? And security, the data provenance quickly pops to the fore. And so then we're almost back now in a more academic kind of discussion. What do I need to do? Well, I need to secure the people. I need to secure the devices. I need to secure the transmission, the communication paths. And how do I do that? And so at that point, we've been fortunate with support from DHS and others to be able to go out and survey the industry, to look at what's available on the market. I think we've ended up with a couple of examples, device authority,
right.
Critical piece of that, to say, well, look, if we put these pieces together in this part of the architecture, they will provide, I don't believe in bulletproof security, but
close,
so
better to have a flak jacket on than not.
Enormous improvements in the security. Maybe quite good, sufficiently good for the next 10 years, or who knows until we try it. But
I think you've done a good job, masterful job of pulling together some key technology providers and demonstrating. I think an important point is that these technologies are available off the shelf. Right. So they're commercially off-the-shelf solutions, cost solutions that are affordable.
Mm-hmm.
They're not extraordinarily priced in a way that makes them difficult to bring in. Yeah. So with that, maybe some closing thoughts on what communities of practice should be doing within your tier group,
mm-hmm.
and how bringing smaller companies and larger companies together with, so you can't just solve the communication trust layer and forget about the devices.
Right.
You can't solve the human identity problem and have insecure devices and insecure communications.
Right.
So bringing them together and having them work together is something that needs a driver
mm-hmm.
to make it happen. You've been able to pull that together, and with an eye towards, in fact, answering the question: is zero trust attainable?
Yeah.
to make it attainable
Mhm.
in a meaningful way. How do you feel about the future of doing that in the narrow sense of what you're doing here in Virginia and maybe in Stafford, but also larger scale? You mentioned earlier that you're doing a lot of testbed work, not only in Virginia but also in North Carolina.
Right.
So how do you stop yourself from going well beyond the boundaries of Virginia and into the national level?
Well, I think the problems are inherently national or international, right? I mean, yes,
They're kind of international. It's the boil the ocean problem,
right?
Yeah.
I think it's clear that sort of commercially relevant solutions will probably end up as competitive clusters, right? If I just think of the cloud providers, right, and the associated capabilities that get latched onto that, and because we're economic development focused from an economic development perspective, that's great, right? I mean, my goal is to, if I can demonstrate a reasonable capability that has appropriate, boundaries around it, framework around it, we want to promote competition at the edges, if you will, right? I mean,
Right.
What are the devices? Who are the cloud providers? What are the applications that use that? How's the communication infrastructure evolving? We're now starting to talk about 6G and 7G, not just 5G anymore. What does that look like, and how does that fit in? So the implementation is going to be based on commercially available products, right? and we want to encourage that. So I'm kind of a believer in the power of, if you can just say, look, here's a feasible path, the market will take over. I'm more than happy at that point to say,
hey,
declare
your job's done, and you won.
It.
There you go. It sounds really good. When you think about, we've got a question here on how do you propose achieving this level of zero trust across multiple cloud providers without overly complicating the environment. What would you say to that challenge of, everybody's coming at it from a different direction, but they're all having to come together?
Yeah. Well, and we're, as we're in discussions with a couple of companies that are looking at how do you abstract the cloud layer,
right.
As an intermediary thing. Again, I think if my concern is the end-to-end supply chain of data, right? You can look at the different segments there, right? How do I protect it on the device? How do I protect it between the device and the cloud? How do I protect it between the cloud and the end users? I think we'll demonstrate a couple of different clouds accessible to this environment, right? And then my theory is at that point, then the market forces will take over, and
right.
Some people will buy into that.
I'm an economist, so I'm going to agree with you on that.
Right.
We believe in the efficient market in that sense.
Yeah. So again, I think if we can show the existence proof of a good solution, then the market will take it from
there. That's wonderful. So to take that question a little further, I know you've got some concerns around AI and machine learning, and in a data exchange and data trust kind of an environment, we're talking about federating machine learning and AI training in a meaningful way, because we're going to get so many processes being run through devices at high speed, at very rapid, low latency turnaround with all the new advanced wireless that's available. That humans just can't keep up with the rate of response that response requirement. What are your concerns going forward with some emerging areas that you think haven't really been addressed well and are going to become problems in 6 months, a year, 2-3 years down the line?
So I mean, I think we've all read about the generative AI programs hallucinating, right, making up facts,
right,
because they're predictive in the sense of the statistically large data sets.
Right.
starting to worry, for example, in a law enforcement context, about what would it take for an AI-based entity to do attestation? Meaning, can I trust an AI system to testify in a court of law? And part of that certainly has to do with back to the identity management. So, do I need to treat an AI-based entity the same way that I treat a human actor in this kind of data ecosystem? And how do I establish the identity of, what does identity management, right?
Who is that AI?
Yeah, what's your mother's maiden name, right?
yeah. Blade Runner. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
the guy got shot for asking that question.
Yeah. So, and if you think
Very
about
human
it,
response, by the way, for AI.
yeah. If you think about it, the Army's starting to talk about software bill of materials for AI. I don't think that by itself is adequate. You certainly need to understand the training data sets. You need to understand kind of the born-on date, if you will, right? The same way you do with beer, understand your AI with the born-on date. So,
right.
And then, some understanding, because the performance and the outputs will migrate over time as more and more data gets exposed. What's that data environment that's been exposed, right? So to me, those are, we go back to a root of trust. Those are the types of things. If I want to accept AI as sort of first-class citizens in this data environment, those are the types of things that I think
the root of trust is critical about. Right. Interesting. So we're pretty much at the end of our time for today. I wanted, we could go on for another hour easily. There's so much to talk about here. So, David, thank you so much for your time and all the insights that you provided. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
And I'm happy to follow up. If other questions pop up.
Send them to us. We'll be more than happy to answer to explore those possibilities. And if you want to join David in these initiatives, whether as a commercial entity providing services or as an interested community of practice from the public sector side, feel free to reach out. I think we'll enjoy that opportunity to learn from one another. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day and the wonderful sessions that Device Authorities put together in this summit. Thank you so much.